Getting the smile and confidence you've been dreaming about, all from the comfort of your home, isn't a total mystery with Bite clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all your friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Bite clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Ariel Powers-Schaub, author of the upcoming book Millennial Nasties, analyzing a decade of brutal horror violence. You've also seen her writing all over the internet, and she's a co-host of The Pod and the Pendulum. Welcome to the show!
Hi, thanks for having me. Super stoked to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So, millennial horror. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the concept of your book?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you don't know a lot about millennial horror, you probably have at least heard the term torture porn. And so that is kind of where I wanted to start. I don't think that descriptor is accurate and all-encompassing enough to sort of hug all the millennial horror we need to. So I wanted to take a deep dive and see what else is millennial horror, if not just under this umbrella of torture porn, and what's a better way to describe that than calling it torture porn? And so that's what I set out to do.
Cool. So, Millennial Nasties, it evokes the kind of the VHS nasties of that, the 70s and 80s. What did you go back through a bunch of films from that decade? How did you sort of tackle the subject matter of your book?
Yeah. Well, I didn't go through all the video nasties, but there are some that draw a direct parallel to millennial horror, particularly
Right.
the ones that were remade, like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Hills Have Eyes. But when I did kind of start thinking about writing a book, a lot of my time was spent researching, which really was just watching a lot of 2000s horror nonstop over and over again, which is a worthy venture in and of itself and would have been a great time even if I hadn't written a book. But as I started to just watch a bunch of these films, I started to think about the things that they had in common, the things they were trying to say, maybe the things they said by accident, and what they all had in common. And I found there was quite a bit there. I think especially considering how often these films can get dismissed, they have quite a lot to say.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back about that decade in particular, because we had a lot of remakes at that time, which reminded me of the 80s, because there's a lot of horror remakes that started to come out during that time frame. And then we did have what people are calling the torture porn, which, for America kind of has like a tie almost to the New French Extremity. So there's a lot of kind of that going on. And you mentioned a little bit of what you found to be in common between all of these films. What did you sort of come away with this experience with?
Horror, and probably most art, is always responding to what came before it and what's going on around it and sort of, building on itself. And so in the Millennial Nasty decade, we were taking a hard turn away from the slashers of the late 90s, which I also love, but they look really different. They were glossy and pretty, well-known actors in them, and followed a pretty, understandable slasher formula. And so 2000s horror, for the most part, does not do that. We do get some slashers in the decade, and I do talk about that in my book, but they tend to be a little bit bleaker, a little bit more gory, not always following what you would think a typical slasher formula would be. And I came away from looking at this decade thinking about Like there's kind of pockets of analysis that are already out there. Like there's a lot that's good that's written about New French Extremity. And there's some out there about the Japanese films coming out at this time, which were also very, it could be very bleak and nasty too. And a lot of times the American films from this time get linked back to 9/11, and that definitely is a part of it. But it really just seems like the whole world was pushing the envelope at this time. Like, as one filmmaker over here pushed this far, the next filmmaker on the other side of the world said, well, if they can do that, then we can do it too. And it just continued to snowball. And we saw a lot of themes of being scared to leave your home, be that your actual home where you can lock your door and there's a home invasion movie, or going on a vacation to a place where Americans are hated and being, you know, people hunting you for sport, like in Hostel. There was a lot of fear of the other, and we see that in Wrong Turn and in some of the remakes as well. Just this idea that people who are different from us are dangerous and we need to watch out for them. And so you can really feel the hurt and the fear of the 2000s all over the world in these horror movies if you want to look for it.
Yeah.
What in particular attracted you to writing about this time period of movies? Was there a movie that like got inspired you? I just want to hear kind of about how you landed on writing about this particular period.
It did kind of build from one movie and spiral from there. So, and I didn't even mean to, because it Saw and the spiral. I didn't even, I should have just gone with it. But anyway.
I believed it.
You can fix it in post, right? Don't do that. Don't worry about it. Yes. So lockdown was crazy, right? We all had a weird time in lockdown. And I was just looping the Saw franchise a lot. Like a lot,
Okay.
like constantly. And it was really good for me, truly. Like I've written about that.
And you liked it before the pandemic?
Yes, I had.
Okay.
And I hadn't gotten all the way through it before the pandemic. So I was coming back to it. And I started to like think about it and like think about themes, and I was like, oh, surely someone has written about this thing. I'm kind of half thinking I want to go read it and process my thoughts, because that's what we like to do after we watch a movie we like. We want to go read somebody's take on it. And I couldn't find any analysis about the particular thing I was thinking about. And I thought, well, I'll just start writing it and just kind of see what happens. It'll just be for me to get my thoughts out there. And then it ended up being actually like a good article, and I published it with Ghouls, and that's how I started writing it all. And so from there I learned, like I sort of relearned how much I loved writing. I hadn't written in a long time. And I love this decade just for like entertainment, enjoyment. These are the movies that were out when I was a teenager, and so a lot of them just have a lot of nostalgia for me. But as I was thinking about how much I had to say about Saw, there were other movies connected to that I was like, well, I also have a lot to say about these. And originally my idea was just to write a book about the Saw franchise, but eventually the scope was broadening to where I was like, okay, I actually want to talk about this whole decade and how all these films connect and what they're all saying to each other. So it did just kind of grow organically over time.
Cool.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That's so cool.
Okay, so Saw was like kind of the launching off point. When did you first see Saw? Like, what was your experience with the Saw franchise?
Yeah. Seesaw, yes. I saw it in theaters when it came out. And, you know, the movie we're going to talk about later, there's a before and after that in my life, you know, and it's sort of similar with Saw. There's like a before Saw and after Saw in my life, because the ending of the movie blew me away so much. I was like, they can't do that. How can they do that? That's illegal. And it made me feel like, it just made me feel so much. And like, I thought the villain was scary. I liked the characters, you know, looking back, like, yeah, it's not perfect, but I mean, it kind of is, but like it has its flaws, but it was just a movie that made me feel so much. And I just enjoyed every minute of like what's going to happen next, and I didn't see the end coming at all. So It's been a pretty special movie to me for 20 years this year.
Wow, 20 years this year.
Yep.
That's wild that Saw has been around for that long.
I know.
I remember seeing that movie in theaters, and I too was surprised by the ending. But I was like, I think I was very trepidatious going into it because all of the like controversy around it, and like I was what if it was 20 years ago, I guess I would have been 24. So I was really clued into like all of the controversy to the point that I was like almost, won't someone think of the children in it in my head, like
Yeah.
about like this idea of, you know, is this as close to like a snuff film as possible? Like what where is the line? And so looking back on it, I'm like, Terry, you're such a fucking idiot. But like at that time, going into the movie, I was like, what is this going to do to cinema? And I went into it with that expectation and was actually blown away by it. And I did not guess the ending coming. So I'm with you on that journey.
And I don't think you're at all alone on wondering, what is this going to do to cinema? Because it did. It did do something to cinema. And, you know, I'm not like the biggest extreme film fan. I have other people in my life who definitely are more into extreme cinema than I am. So I always feel like I'm a little baby at the top of the iceberg and they're way down at the bottom. But I do like some extreme cinema. And I think it's really good to think about your line. Where's your line? Why is it there? What is okay to portray on screen? If it's fictional or non-fictional, like what are you okay with watching and why? That's a super important thing to think about as a horror fan, just to have some self-reflection about why you like the entertainment that you like. I think that's a good thing to do. And so, you know, maybe the reactions were a bit overblown and kind of tempered your expectations going in, but there's a lot of good conversation to be had there if people want to have it. If they just want to say, people have said to me many times, you're a sick fuck for liking XYZ movie. I'm like, cool, we can't really have this conversation then because you're not really approaching it in good faith.
Right. Right.
Yep. I have that conversation quite a bit all the time when people are like, I don't like horror movies. And I'm like, well, then
Okay.
I don't really know how we're going to have a conversation.
Moving on.
Like,
are we just listing things we don't like? I don't like mushrooms. Like, what are we doing?
Oh my gosh, you don't like mushrooms?
I know, my life would be better if I did. I really want to like them.
Texture thing or taste?
I guess it must be texture.
Yeah, that's fair.
And also, the idea of them freaks me out.
I mean, they're creepy.
That's fair.
Don't get me wrong, but I
about
do.
mushrooms too long.
Yeah,
I do love mushrooms.
My life would be better if I did, and I do acknowledge that.
I'm telling you, I don't know how you could eat pizza without having mushrooms on it. But sorry, this is not a mushrooms that scarred us.
I necessarily agree with that, but anyway. So, and obviously Saw is a lot of importance to you, but in researching this book, what was like one of the more interesting things you learned, or maybe films that you discovered in researching and writing the book?
Well, something I discovered that was maybe more surprising to me than it should have been is how connected all of these films are from this time. And maybe that's true of any era in Hollywood. I don't really know. But as I was watching these movies, I kept going, wait a minute, that's a name I recognize, and that's a face I recognize. And I started figuring out, like, across these films that I cover in my book, there is so much, like, creative cross connection. And, like, this person directed, and then they did production over here and cinematography over here, and this actor was in 5 of the films I cover. And it intrigued me so much that I put at the end of my book a chart that shows how some of the ways, not even all of the ways, just some of the ways that the movies all connect to one another. And I was very proud of calling it 6 Degrees of Sawperation. It's cheesy as hell, and I love it. So, but I did. All the movies connect back to Saw in 6 moves or less. And so I was like, cool, I can use this idea. So that was a discovery that was surprising to me. I think realizing how much I liked some films I didn't necessarily remember. Like, I'm sure you've both had this experience where when you sit down to analyze a film, you actually appreciate it more. Like, I think that's pretty normal. And so some of these films I had just kind of watched as whatever before, like Rob Zombie's Halloween and Halloween 2. But when I sat down to watch those critically, I was like, whoa, okay, I need to take a step back because there's actually a lot here to talk about.
Okay. Huh.
That's fair. There is a lot. I mean, like, as much as I don't necessarily love those movies, there is a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, especially like in his depiction and of like class and
Yes.
like class representation. Because I mean, people talk about that a lot with him, with his representations of like lower class and like blue collar people and things like that.
Mhm.
So as much as like in my head I'm like those movies aren't my favorite, there is a lot to talk about, especially the second one where it gets all weird and like psychological
I've
with
never
the
seen
horse.
the second one. I've never seen the
I
second
like
one.
it more.
That's what
I think I do too.
I have heard
I do
that.
too. Yeah, it's
Because-
like
Particularly
it takes bigger swings.
the director's cut, right? Isn't there a director's cut of that
There
one?
is, yes. And it's very
Yes.
different. Well,
Yes.
you know, it's not Escape Room too different, but it's pretty different. And I don't necessarily love every movie that I wrote about in the book. I'll never
Oh,
tell
yeah.
which ones I actually don't love. I probably will, but it's not that big a deal. But I still think it's like, I cannot like a movie and still appreciate how it fits into this time period in history. And I know
Oh,
you
yeah.
can too, Mary Beth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just a weird place to be in, I think, when you realize like you're writing about a genre or a subgenre. It's like, and I've tackled this a couple times, like in writing, is like, I don't like this at all, but like I do know it's important. So like I
Yeah.
have to be able to write about it. And like that's such an important part, I think, that people don't realize about film analysts and critics is like a
Mhm.
lot of our job is to kind of try to still have opinions, but also try to analyze it as objectively as possible too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a weird place to be in, but it's a cool skill to have, I will say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it definitely makes for some fun assignments you give yourself where you're like, I said I was going to write about this and now I have to figure out what I'm going to say. But the movies I chose to include, one of the reasons I chose to include all of them is because I thought I had enough to say without also repeating my same points over and over again.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So then with the book, how would you get introduced to horror? Like, how did your journey with the horror genre start?
I wish I had like a cool like sleepover memory like some people have. The truth of the matter is that horror has just always been there my whole life. And like, I don't remember a time before horror. Growing up, I mean, my parents and my older brother were into it. And so I just grew up around it. There were Stephen King books all over our house. We watched the Stephen King miniseries when they were on TV. We got to get videos from the Tans and Tapes down the street. It was a tanning salon and a pizza place and a video rental store. It was amazing. The 90s were great.
Wow. What
Yeah.
a combination.
You put in your pizza order, you get in the tanning booth. When you get out of the tanning booth, you get your tape, you get your pizza, and you go. I mean, we didn't do that because we were children, but you know, I aspired to that one day.
Beautiful.
Anyway, yeah, so
That's amazing.
all of that being said, I mean, horror was just always there. I've always liked creepy, spooky things. My family was super into Halloween. We were into camping, and so we were into campfire stories. So it really just always was there.
Oh, cool. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So your parents were okay with you watching stuff, reading stuff? There wasn't like as much oversight?
You know, it's funny. I feel like they did care, but I also don't ever remember not being able to watch something. Like, I don't know if that's just because my friends had parents who didn't pay attention as much. No, my parents definitely were selective. Like, they thought the Stephen King miniseries were okay because they were on TV. So surely they were fine for children.
Surely.
We were allowed to read whatever we wanted because my
Yeah.
parents were like, reading's good. You can read anything. The only book I was ever expressly forbidden to read was Gerald's Game. So I obviously
Oh.
read it immediately.
Right.
Duh. You're like, and I'm going to the library.
Right. I was like, it's on the shelf in our house. I took it, I read it, I hid it under my bed while I was reading it. I'm sure my parents must have known. But I was like, this is the only book you ever told me I can't read. I'm going to read it immediately. And like,
Absolutely.
I understand why that was the one they said no to. But I think they were just like, I have an older brother. He's 5 years older than me. They were like, well, she's going to get exposed to whatever he's doing anyway. So we'll just make him explain it all to her and it'll be fine.
Honestly, I love
And it
that
was.
policy though. That's actually really smart. You're like, all right, well, It's on him.
Yeah. And like
You
if we
put
were
that on
watching
him, and
something as a
that's
family, it felt so much safer, you know? Like the scary thing
Hmm.
wasn't really
yeah.
scary, it was fun, which is
That's
very wholesome.
I've never thought about that before, but like that really is so true. Like things I watched with my parents versus like things I snuck, it was so much
Mhm.
scarier. The experience of it, because that like, even the
Yes.
experience of watching it alone and sneaking it made it feel so scary. And then with
Yes.
your parents, you can kind of laugh at it, or like they'll
Well, and
laugh
there's
at it and be like,
like,
"Oh, okay, it's safe to laugh at this. It's not
Mhm.
scary."
and there's potentially the other like added layer of danger to it where you're watching something you don't feel as if your parents would want you to watch. And so
Mhm.
that adds like another layer of that to that as well. But I'm curious because I love the book Gerald's Game, and
Mhm.
I'm curious what your experience was reading that after like being told no. Do you remember it all?
I do. I th- I must have been in high school. I don't actually remember. I'm sure I could look up what year the book came out and that would help me. But like it's weird to me that my parents would tell me I couldn't read a book when I was in high school, but I feel like it must have been. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Came out in 92.
Oh, did it? Okay, maybe I was
Yeah.
in middle school then. I remember like it made me feel sick and it made me feel scared, but not in a way that other Stephen King books always did. And I had been allowed to read Dolores Claiborne and Rose Madder, and
Mm,
that's sort of like they're all connected.
right.
I remember my parents, so my parents were hippies, like for real. And sex was okay on screen, but violence was not. Like that was a
Okay.
big thing of theirs was they didn't want me to see
Interesting.
violence. Like for example, in The
Oh,
Lion King, when Scar slaps Simba's mom, my mom wanted us to look away at that point because she didn't want us to see a man slapping a woman. And I was like, Mom, they're literally cartoon lions. I love you so much. So I think like the domestic violence aspect was what they didn't want me experiencing in Gerald's Game. And I remember
Yeah.
thinking like, Mom and Dad wanted to protect me from this. But then I also felt like I couldn't go talk to them about it and process it with them.
Right.
And this was like the internet was not what it is now, if we even had the internet at all at the time. So I just kind of had to sit with it until I became an adult and found other people who had read it. So yeah, a great
Wow.
just
book though.
processing that trauma for years alone in
Yeah,
your head, and you're like,
yeah.
will I ever let this to leave my brain?
It's one of my favorite of his books.
It's
I'm going
great.
to admit. It's really well done.
Hmm.
The
I
movie's
haven't
really
read
good
it.
too.
It is. Yeah, I'm a fan, plan a stan, whatever we're calling ourselves.
I like that. But so, what was the first horror movie you ever saw?
I'm not sure. I
Okay.
think it might have been the It miniseries, just
Okay.
because I think I was 3 or 4 when that came out, and I'm sure we had it on. Mary Beth, the faces you're making. I promise my family was like, good.
Oh, it's not a judgment to your family at all, because like I love that they were more worried about you seeing violence than sex. That's
They're
very
very worried about that.
refreshing. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Just like I
Yeah.
think so lots of people are like violence is fine, but sex is gross. And I love a good like kind of more sex positive sounding household,
They
even
were
in the
they were
90s, which I
for real
love.
hippies. Like for real lived in a van in the 70s hippies. So that's where I'm
See,
coming from.
and
Okay, okay,
I
okay.
I
I love
do
that
love
though.
that because my
Terry
experience
came
was the
from the
exact
literal opposite.
the
Okay.
literal opposite. It was
Okay.
like anytime there was sex on screen, I had to sit there like this with my eyes closed. Any single time. But violence, okay. But
Yeah.
anytime there was boobies, it was like, nope, Terry can't see those.
Yeah. Well, I feel like more households were that way when I was
Yeah.
growing up, and so I
Oh
felt
yeah.
weird. I
I
do
love
have
that.
a memory though, a very vivid memory of sneaking movies. So when I was in 2nd grade, so I was maybe 8 years old, I stayed home sick from school one day, and my dad stayed home with me, but he usually worked in the night shift, so he had to sleep during the day. So, like, he was there if I needed something, but I was like to fend for myself. I'm 8, I can be fine. But what I did was watch The Exorcist and The Shining.
Oh,
I did a little double feature for my 8-year-old sick brain.
wow. How
Yeah,
did that go over for you?
badly.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
mom was pissed. My
Wow.
mom got home and was
That's
like, "You let this happen on your watch." My dad felt terrible. I was terrified. I mean, I love both those movies to this day. I
But
still think The
still,
Exorcist is pretty scary, and I think it's probably because I am scarred for life. We said the
oh
name.
yeah, you said the
You
name.
did. Where's the
But
Leo gif?
I know. But do you find yourself still getting scared at things now?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm assuming it's probably harder to scare you, but do you still find yourself getting scared?
I'm scared of everything.
Okay.
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 Yeah, I'm one of those.
Do you remember the last movie that you saw that scared you, or one that you recommend for those that want to be scared?
Hereditary scared the shit out of me. That's the most scared I've been as an adult at a movie, of course.
Fair.
This is true. I went to see this in theaters with my husband and another friend. And after it got out at like 10, we went to the bar to get some food. And I had to go to the bathroom, but I was too scared to go to the bathroom by myself at the bar. So I didn't go. I was like, I'll just wait till we get home. And then our town had a flood, which never happens. We had a flash flood. And we were trying to drive home in it, which you shouldn't do. So we had to wait out the flood on the top of a hill. And I had to go to the bathroom so bad.
Oh no.
Because I had been too scared to go after Hereditary. I can only watch that movie once a year.
Wow.
I have to hype myself up for it. It scares the shit out of me. And
which part of it scares? I mean, obviously, I get it. It's a
Yeah.
fucking scary movie, but like, is there a part in particular that gets to you, or is it just the whole thing?
man, I think it's just the way everything builds. Like it starts
Okay.
feeling unsettled, like you're unsettled right away, but it's nonstop. I mean, that's Ari Aster, right? He just hits you with it for 2 straight hours and calls it a day. I think it's just the way it builds, and like Toni Collette's performance makes you really feel it along with her. And it just freaks me out so much. So another movie that scared me pretty recently was Incantation. Did you
Okay,
guys see?
I have not seen that one. Mary Beth, you're not really a fan, right?
I need to rewatch it because I watched
Okay.
it when I was really tired at Fantasia. It was like the end of
Okay.
the day. So
Yeah.
like I did not give it a fair shake. I don't think that was like I didn't think it was that scary, but I need to rewatch it and give it a fair shake.
Well, and
Because a lot of
sometimes
people have said that about Incantation
Yes.
too. And like I just didn't get it. But again, I know the status of which my brain was when I watched it was not optimal for like absorbing information properly. So let's just
Yeah.
say.
Well, I mean, I think the thing about Incantation is like,
It's found footage, right?
yeah,
Mhm.
it's found footage, and I watched it by myself in the dark, which always helps with found footage, I think. And yeah, it's a language I do not speak, so it's helpful when I'm awake enough to like, I can't always watch things that aren't in English if I'm not awake enough for it. So I see what you
Yep.
mean, Mary Beth.
Yeah, exactly. Like I didn't watch it when I was paying full attention, so I needed to give it another shake because I know people really
Yeah.
like it. So
But
cool.
there are movies that other people have been super scared of in the last few years that haven't affected me as much. So, like, it's just one of those things.
Fear is so subjective, like
Yes.
about what scares us. So
I love it.
I know. Okay, so we've talked about your book, Ariel. We've talked about your horror history, but what movie did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
I brought the greatest movie of all time. I
sure
brought
did.
The Blair Witch Project.
Hell yeah. So the Blair Witch Project, we've covered this before long, long ago, but since this year is the 25th anniversary, it only seems appropriate that we are revisiting it, especially with someone who has written about not quite when this came out, but right after. So in the Blair Witch Project, 3 film students vanish after traveling into a Maryland forest to film a documentary on the local Blair Witch legend, leaving only their footage behind.
It's almost as if it's found footage, huh?
A year later, their footage was found.
A year later, the footage was found.
All right. So take us back. How old were you when you saw this? How did you see this? What about it terrified you? Let's get into your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you have the background on my family going into this. So I was
you
12.
love camping, so I'm sure that's gonna factor in somehow.
Yeah. Camping was a super affordable like trip you could do, especially where we grew up in the Midwest. So it was like, yeah, we're in the woods all the time. So I was 12 and I saw this in the theater. And, you know, as much as the viral marketing is a super important part of the Blair Witch Project's history. It's not a part of my history with the movie. I didn't know anything about it. Like, we had the internet at my house, but I didn't really, like, I didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't on there. And I hadn't experienced, like, I had never even heard of it. So my dad and my brother go get in the car. We're going to the movies. And I was just like, okay. So we go to the movies and we plop down and I start watching something that I don't know what I'm looking at because it doesn't look like a movie. You know, there's not, it looks like somebody's home movie. And I'm kind of like, this looks like news footage or something. But I'm sitting there thinking, I don't think my dad would take me to watch people really die, would he? So I was terrified because, I mean, I think the movie works as a scary movie anyway, but I had never heard of found footage. I don't think the term really existed before the Blair Witch Project, or maybe not in the mainstream. So I had never heard of it. Did not understand the concept. I just saw the screen at the beginning that tells me their footage was found. And I watched till the end and I was like, what the hell did we just watch? And I was so scared because it was this conflicted, like, dissonant feeling in me of, this must not be real because I watched it in a movie theater, but it seems so real. And at 12, you know the difference between real and pretend. You're old enough for that. But this had, like, found me back in it was like a new place I didn't understand that was between real and pretend.
Yeah.
And it scared the hell out of me. So in the car on the way home, my dad and brother explained, like, this is a movie and they did it this way for these reasons. And when we got home, my brother showed me the website and, like, explained to me he had been knowing about it and been doing all the stuff. So he like showed
sweet
me.
Big brother.
He's very sweet. He's also a legit genius. It was really hard going behind him in school, but
You're like, hello, yes, he is.
They were
my
like,
brother.
oh, you're his sister. I'm like, yeah, you're gonna be disappointed in me.
Lower your expectations, babe.
Yeah, just lower those, especially in a small town. Are you kidding me? No, but he's very sweet.
Anyway,
so it was just like I had discovered a new way to be afraid after 12 years of enjoying spooky stuff. I had found a new area of spooky that I didn't know about. And I said this earlier about Saw, but there really is, like, before the Blair Witch Project and after the Blair Witch Project in my life, because ever since then, I have been chasing that feeling to be like, I want to be as unsettled and feeling unsafe, but knowing I am safe as I felt when I was 12. And I'm just going to look for that forever.
Oh yeah. That's so cool.
Thank you.
I mean, that's like the feel that I think a lot of us get, right? For me, it's always that, and I think that's what I love about the show is that a lot of times this moment is sort of the defining moment for what you end up. My gosh, I cannot even speak. It sort of becomes like the defining moment for what you're searching for the rest of your life. For me, it was like seeing Alien and being like absolutely terrified and turning off the movie right after the chest bursting scene. And so it's like you are chasing that high, I think, after that. So I do love that this is that moment for you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pretty fun one, and it's a good story.
Yeah, it's a really good story. What were, like, the after effects after watching it? Like, did you hate going camping? Because, like, you obviously mentioned that you were a camping family. So, like, it fucked me up about camping with my family. So I'm assuming it probably had a similar effect on you as a child.
Somewhat. So a lot of the times
you're a braver person than I.
No. Remember, I'm always afraid. So, like, we're starting with the baseline level. Like, you know how the Hulk is always angry? I'm always afraid. But it's just like a baseline. So a lot of times when we would go camping, we would be staying at a site and I could, like, if I wanted to, I could, like, walk to the road. So I wouldn't be lost. But there were times when my super sweet older brother would make the little stick figures and leave them around the tent. And then, but, like, I also loved it. You know, I was like, oh, this is so scary. And then he would immediately be like, it was me. And I'd be like, ha 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 ha. And so it was again this like, because it was something I had shared with people who were safe, I think it was like that whole experience from there. It was like I could keep coming back to the fear, but it was okay. So it didn't fuck me up too badly. And I didn't really have another experience with found footage until Paranormal Activity, which was years later. Because I also, as a young teen, didn't really know how to seek out a specific type of horror. Like if it wasn't at the video shop, I didn't, I couldn't like go online and Google best found footage movies. So like the Blair
So
Witch
you
Project was this really singular event in my life
Yeah.
for a long time, and like a very personal event until I like started writing and talking about horror.
Yeah.
wait, so you were not the teenager that was looking and pirating things on the internet. That was not you.
So
Well, I guess 1999 is early, I know.
yeah.
That's
So
obviously an earlier, like that period, because I did in fact potentially do that when I saw Paranormal Activity. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Who did? Who
right,
knows?
and nobody can prove anything. So Paranormal Activity came out when I was already in college, and I think like I definitely downloaded music in the Wild West days of Napster, but I
Oh my
think I
god!
really didn't.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice. Suck.
I didn't know about downloading movies. Like I think I didn't know that was
Cool.
something you could do. Like
Same.
as much as my family was supportive of my love of horror, it felt like none of my friends in real life were. I had one horror buddy. But trying to like I didn't have all my friends where we would like get together and figure out like how to find a horror movie. Like that's just not something we could do until I did go to college, and like Netflix sending DVDs in the mail happened around the same time I went to college, and so that became very accessible. And obviously when streaming hit, it changed the game for everything forever. Um, but I would say like the period of time, like honestly, the Millennial Nasties period of time, I was just watching those because I didn't know how to get anything else.
Oh yeah. No, that's awesome. I was a deviant. I was the friend that everyone came to look for movies online. Whenever I had horror movie nights, it was always like, Mary Beth's gonna find something weird online. And I'm like,
I love that. I wish I had had you doing that for me as a young teen. I just didn't know what to do. Like truly, and I know how weird this sounds in 2024, but like I didn't understand the internet. I didn't want anything to do with it until I had to. I was like, this is weird.
Fair.
Like I'll go on there for email and that's it. So I just wasn't ready.
I was
Yeah.
such a little shit so much that my dad would be like, well, why can't you find this movie? I'm like, Dad, that movie isn't even filmed yet. He's like, well, you can find everything else. I'm like, I am not that much of a wizard when it comes to finding movies on the internet, dude. Like,
I can't
they have
make
to be
one
out.
exist.
I know. I'm like, I can't just like manifest it. I remember for The Witch, he was like, why can't you find it? I'm like, what are you talking about?
That's
Anyway.
really funny.
What are you gonna say, Terry?
I was just thinking like I'm starting to like I don't think I realized this when we recorded about this film towards the very beginning of our podcasting journey, but this like hearing you talk about this film reminded me that it's a singular event. Like this could
Mhm.
not I don't think this film could ever exist with the power that it had at that time, because so it came out it premiered at Sundance, which 18-year-old Terry did not know anything about. It wasn't until July of 1999, because I'm looking up on Wikipedia. So I had just graduated high school. I'm 18 years old. I don't have a computer at home. I
Mhm.
have just the computer at the place that I'm working. And so I remember hearing all this buzz about this film, that it was real, that it
Yeah.
was, it's like a found footage film. That term did not mean anything to us, that they had found this, and that that they were putting it out there for everyone to see. And I remember looking at the website, now that I'm talking about this, at work, because I didn't have internet at home.
Yeah.
And so I was at work looking up this website, and just like I'm starting to also realize this recording how impressionable I was as a 20-year-old me, because like between this and then saw a few years later, getting like worked up with what the media is saying. And I'm starting to think that maybe it's because of my family, because my parents were very getting into Republican, and like everything that was being played on television was definitely like the you
Oof.
know, Fox News-esque type thing. And so I'm starting to think that maybe like because I was living in that environment that like I was like going the moral decay, the like I'm starting to realize just how fucking impressionable I was. But I thought this movie was real.
Yeah.
I remember watching the sci-fi mockumentary that I thought was
Mm-hmm.
an actual documentary because that stuff didn't exist. No one made mockumentaries of that unless it was something like This Is Spinal Tap or Christopher Guest is making something, you know, comedic.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't exist. And so I saw that just eating it up, like didn't question why is it on Sci-Fi Channel? Didn't question any of that. I'm just sort of like taking this and going, oh my God, this is terrifying. And so
Mm-hmm.
I remember going to see it opening night with my friends and just being absolutely theater full of people and just being so terrified the entire time and then finding out, you know, a little bit later that it was all a joke. They had them on you know, some of the late night television shows eventually and it was deflating after that because I was like so
Mm-hmm.
built up that this was like a real thing. But it traumatized me as a 18-year-old for
Yeah.
sure. For sure.
So you were 12, Ariel, you said when you saw this, right?
Yes, I was 12.
Okay, because I think I was 10, 11, something like close to your age. I can't remember. I'm trying to base it because I saw it with my dad and I based it on the apartments he lived in. It was like,
Okay.
what era of apartment? Because he was married to his second wife at this point, and I sometimes think my dad just showed me scary movies because he wanted to watch them and didn't think about potentially the consequences that showing like a
Mm-hmm.
10-year-old girl like the Blair Witch Project, because he had explained it to me and I was like, that sounds cool. Like, and he said people thought it was real, but it wasn't real. So like he didn't really try to
Okay.
pull, I don't remember ever thinking it was like real. But I do remember watching it and at the end of it, looking at him and throwing a pillow at him and like on the verge of tears because I was so scared. Because like I live in Maryland, as everyone in this
Mm-hmm.
podcast has heard 6,000 million times. I was like, are you fucking serious? This is happening. Like I had never seen a horror movie take place in our state. So I was like, are you
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
fucking kidding me? Like this could be real. I go to Girl Scout camp in the woods of like in
Oh,
Maryland
yeah.
woods. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like this bitch is gonna come after me. I can't do this. And my dad had to pick up his wife from work because she was a bartender, and I never went with him. I made him take me with him that
Oh,
night. I was like,
yeah.
I'm not staying home. And she was like, why the fuck are you here? She was like, you never come with him. I was like, he said, we showed her the Blair Witch Project. And she's like, Mark, why did you do that? And I was just like in the back seat, like pale as a fucking ghost. The end sequence, I was like, the ending
Oh,
especially,
yeah.
like ruined my life. I was like, I don't know what I just watched, but I hate it.
It's so distressing.
It's so upsetting.
Yeah.
I was like, and then when it just sits there, like, and that was my
Mm-hmm.
first, I feel like my first memory of like experiencing just a static shot in horror. And I was like, what do you mean you're just going to do that to me for minutes on end and have nothing show up? Like, what do you fucking mean you're going to do that to me and make me like want to cry? It's so scary.
Mm-hmm.
And everything about it was just like felt wrong. Um, Even from the beginning, it just feels cursed.
Yes, it does.
I know. I was also thinking that, like, I think this was my first encounter with something that wasn't like Hollywood produced, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mhm.
particularly through like the '90s, you know, I'm starting to when I finally got back into horror. You know, we're watching Scream, we're watching I Know What You Did Last Summer, we're watching all of this like very polished, very, you know, all these well-known actors in it. It was having like a little teen boom, and so like that was all the content that I was consuming at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so to see this, that like it looks like a home movie, and that is like it seems so silly to say that now because the found footage genre has become such a big boom in the last like 20 years. But like going into it is like this is unlike anything that I had ever seen before in my entire life, and it felt more real in ways that
Mm-hmm.
the more flashiness of the 90s had.
Mm-hmm.
It was weird. So like I think it was just, again, I don't think this movie could exist in to the degree in which it exists today. I don't know what they would do.
Oh, I
I
don't
don't know
think
how
it
they would
could.
do something like this.
I think it's too hard with the internet. It's too
Mm-hmm.
easy. You can't fool people as easily. It's just I think it was like very lightning in a bottle moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
which is cool as
Hook, line,
which
and
is cool as
sinker here.
hell. Yeah, I mean, like, it's cool as hell, and I mean, this movie still holds up today. Like, my husband watched it for the first time like a year or two ago, and it scared him, and he doesn't
Mhm.
like it shook him. Like, he doesn't really get super scared, but he was like anxious and very unnerved by it. So like, it still holds up. Like, even though it looks 90s and how they like look, but it
Mhm.
also feels weirdly timeless at this, like, especially because I feel like everyone now dresses like they're in the 90s. So when I
Yes.
watch it, I feel like it feels like it's kind of looped back to feeling like, oh, this could be anyone today.
Because we record ourselves constantly now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, record ourselves constantly, and thinking about just how now we're all like, a lot of people are going back to filming more analog styles and like
Mhm.
trying to capture things that way. So it's interesting watching it now when it's like we've come back, we've circling back like nostalgia wise, like, oh, this feels like it could be technically made today, but the phenomenon of it could not be
Yeah.
Yeah.
replicated, I think. And I think so many movies want to chase that and try so
Mhm.
hard to, when it's like, you're not gonna get there. I'm sorry. Like, it's just, you can't replicate it. Paranormal Activity and Cloverfield did a little bit in a different way, but yeah.
Yeah, I
It's
think there's
just,
probably something you could do to find your own version of that gimmick. And I don't mean gimmick in a negative way, but just to
No.
find
oh
your own
yeah.
thing.
Oh
There's
yeah.
probably lots of versions of that, but this specific thing, yeah, you couldn't do it now. You get on Twitter in 4 seconds and you'd see all the all the spoilers and everything.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, but like, for you, when you first watched this, Ariel, what were the scariest moments to you? Were there moments in particular that really stood out as
Yeah.
terrifying?
Yeah, well, certainly the end, of course.
Mhm.
Always.
And now as like an adult who understands more about film, what I understand one of the things that's so unsettling about this scene is that only one of the cameras is recording sound, and so it
Yes.
is, yeah, like Heather's camera, I can't remember which camera it is that records sound and which doesn't, but one of them records sound and one of them doesn't. So all of the sound is distorted in a weird way when you're in the house. And now I understand why that's such an unsettling feeling. But at the time I didn't. I just knew it made me feel really creepy. So that for sure. When they find the bundle of teeth and whatnot, that really scared me, especially because, now with Blu-rays and HD TVs, you can tell what that is. In the theater, I couldn't tell what it was. I
Yeah.
didn't
So
know what it
that's what
was.
scared the shit out of me when I saw it when I was a kid. I was like, I'm sorry, what the fuck is that? And like, it
Yeah.
flashes so quickly. Like, and
You
that's
can
when it's so,
kinda tell
like, an
it's
ear, a nose, maybe. Like, there's like
exactly.
a
I thought it was
tooth.
an ear for a long time.
Yeah. And like, every time I watch it, I feel like I see something different in there, which is like
Mhm.
insanely silly. But like, it's so quick and they
Yes.
flash it so fast, but they literally package it so well that you're like, whatever the
Mhm.
fuck is in there is gross, because the blood is coming. We have the stick bundle
Yes.
that she's unwrapping, and then we have the flannel with the twine, and you see the blood, and you're like, well, whatever's in there, it sure
It's
ain't
not
good,
good. It's
because
not
like,
good.
just minutes before, we heard Josh potentially screaming as something bad is happening to him in the woods, and we're like, I don't want to know what's in there. And she opened it, and I was like,
Yeah.
fuck, god damn it. Now I have to. Ugh. Ugh. And it's daylight. That's what's scariest to me.
Yes.
And all the
Yeah.
bad things happen at night, but then in daylight, when they find that, I'm like, oh no,
You're
there
not
is no more
safe.
safe time. Like, it's
Yeah.
you're unsafe no matter what. And that kind of got into my head as a kid too, of like, oh wait, I thought daytime was safety and that nothing bad could happen to you when the sun was up.
Yeah.
I do think that Paranormal Activity plays with that really well. A few years later, where it's like it all is like
Mm-hmm.
nighttime, and then eventually it starts to seep
Oh,
into the
yeah.
day, and you're like,
Yeah.
not even safe during the day. So like, I agree. Rewatching this now as an adult, seeing that moment, and just realizing that like all the stuff that was at night that you can't see anything, now you can see, and sure,
Mhm.
it's a quick splash of it, but like we're seeing it, and it's there in the daylight, and no one is safe. And I
Yeah.
do, now 20 years later, I do appreciate that moment a lot more than seeing in the theater and being like, what was that? What am I supposed to be? What was that?
When they find all of the stick people hanging in the woods.
Mhm.
I find that so unsettling. Like creepy in a different way than finding your friend's body parts.
Well,
It's
because
like
they film it on that the film camera that you doesn't
Yeah.
have. I think it's the 16 millimeter
Yes.
that you're talking about previously that doesn't have the audio. They're only doing the audio on the other
on the
camcorder.
DAT, yeah.
On the DAT, yes, thank you. I was like, DAT. So when they're filming the figures, it is in that black and white film stock, and it feels like a cursed movie, like part of what you do in The Ring because of how they're filming
Yes.
it, how it looks like.
It feels
And
like you've walked in on a ritual
yes,
that you interrupted.
exactly. It feels. I got goosebumps. Sorry, I was so it felt like you're interrupting because that is that still comes into my head whenever I go into the woods. I'm like, if I walk into any fucking clearing, where there's anything, because when I filmed my movie in the woods, I got over it very quick, but I still think about the Blair Witch Project when I'm in the woods. Even
Of
now, I'm
course.
like,
Well,
I'm not
and
saying it's haunted, but I don't fucking know what's in those woods. I have a healthy fear of the woods. Mm-mm.
well, and
Nope.
that's what I was going to say. Like, you grew up in the woods. I grew up in the woods. You've seen weird shit in the woods. I'm sure of it. I've seen
Oh.
weird shit in the woods where you just walk away
Yep.
and you go,
Yep.
this
Just-
isn't, I don't know what this is. And it's certainly not my business.
Nope.
And I'm going to go. And it's
Yeah.
like things, yeah, I think a lot about how a lot of fear is something normal being in a not normal place.
Yeah.
You know, like a totally
Yeah.
innocuous object, but it's wrong somehow. That's what you find in the woods. And you just got to move past it.
Yeah. I did too much camping with my parents and heard too many weird things. Nope. Terry, what were you going to say? Sorry.
We never went camping, but I did grow up in Alaska, and our house was
Okay.
against the woods. Like
You
the
win.
wood, literally going outside our back door and going into you will go into the wilderness.
Oh, God.
And as a kid in the 80s, my parents are like, go have fun. And so I am exploring the woods, and you come across, yes, the moment you said that, I was like, yes, I remember coming across things, and it's like, there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
And just basically even as a young kid being like, okay, I'm gonna go over here now.
Mhm.
And you find things like the things that stick in my mind to this day is something that I think I've mentioned on the podcast before, but woods porn. Like,
Yes.
you don't
big time. Big time.
Yeah. So I
That's
remember
a milestone moment for a kid in the pre-internet. Yeah.
And it's also creepy though, because again,
Yes.
it's something that you have seen maybe in at a grocery store that have the dividers so you
Yep.
can't pick it up, but it is something that you've seen, but it's in the woods. And then the question becomes, well, who put it there? And why is it there?
Yeah.
And
Are they coming back for it?
right.
Have
And
I
so,
disrupted it? Yeah.
it's like this thing, and I'm probably, gosh, I would have been 8 or 9 at the time, and I'm stumbling across a little sliver of probably a Playboy magazine that is just, breasts on display in the middle of the woods, and it's there's something very disturbing about that because it's the woods and you don't expect to see that kind of thing.
Yep.
Why are there titties in the woods? Is
Right.
what Terry is asking.
I've always asked.
I always laugh in looking back at I was growing up when there was still some internet, but my parents were still like, please leave my home. You have to go outside. So they just let me wander the woods.
Yeah.
Isn't it wild how our parents were just like, yeah, go ahead.
They were like,
gone
you're
for hours.
outside. That's good.
I'm
Outside is
climbing
good.
around abandoned houses.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And and when I was getting older, doing that while smoking weed,
Yeah.
the dumbest shit of all time.
It's not
just
good.
Also, why were there so many abandoned houses in the woods in my neighborhood? Can someone explain?
Yeah. Yeah. There was an
I
abandoned
don't know
mill.
if y'all had a lot of. Oh, you had an abandoned mill. Okay, cool.
It was gnarly, man. Even I didn't really want to go near it. I did because I didn't want to be uncool, but I didn't want to go too far into it because I was like, I'm a little bit of a germaphobe. And so I was like, there's germs in there. And who knows what else?
I should have told my friends, I'm not gonna be the one who finds a dead body today. I just assumed that there were dead bodies everywhere. I had watched enough horror. I read enough weird shit. I was like, I am not getting involved. I refuse to go very far
Seen
into
Stand
houses
By
like
Me.
that.
Mm-mm.
I was
Yeah.
like, I've seen enough. I don't need to be a part of a horror movie. Like, no, I'm not going into the abandoned house behind the 7-Eleven. Like, why would I be doing that? Like, and then my friends would go in. I'm like, I'll stay out here with the weed. Like, have fun.
You're smarter
weird.
than me. I was
That's a weird
like,
kid.
I don't want to be uncool. I'll go in the scary house, but I never see. I'm afraid. I don't want to.
Nope, fuck that shit. Nope. Anyway.
So on this rewatch, the thing that like really pulled me in was Heather Donahue's performance. Like I don't think
My queen.
I
Love
don't
her
think
so
I
much.
appreciated what all that she is doing
You
until
didn't.
this
No one
watch.
did.
No, to
Sorry.
the point that like she changed her name.
Yeah, she fucked
She
off and
legally,
started growing marijuana, which I mean, good
yeah.
for her. But
Good
like,
for her. She's back now. This year, she's been doing more cons again, and like actually for the 25th anniversary, she's been going to more cons, and
good.
like
Okay.
things have got. I've heard
They need to
through
give her more
grapevines.
money.
And like, so, I mean, you guys have all probably seen them. If you haven't seen this, we'll maybe be the first to tell you that there's a lot going on with these the 3 stars are asking for compensation now because Lionsgate is like using their images for promotion of the new trilogy. And
Oh, is it going to be a trilogy?
Like, yeah. Why the fuck do we keep doing trilogies? Can someone explain it to me? Besides money? But they're basically the 3 of them are asking for better compensation and like creative control over how their likenesses and names are used, because I don't know if any of you guys probably know this, but like listeners, their names were like copywritten by Miramax, and like they didn't have legal rights to their own names and had to sue for legal rights to their own names because they used their actual names in the movie, and so Miramax owned their names. And so like these 3 actors have been treated like absolute like shit. And this happens so much with indie movies like this. This goes like they go crazy, and then the actors are given no money because when they're made, they don't have a budget. And a lot of the time actors are either paid nothing and just given points in the back end, or more likely they're given like $500 and said, okay, thanks so much. And they're not given any kind of points in the back end, which means they won't get money after the fact. Like they're not going to get royalties or money as the movie continues to make money. So they didn't make that much money from this whole situation. And so they're finally speaking again out about it, especially Heather, who got bullied into fucking hiding because people hate. Sorry, I get really emotional about this.
Go ahead, Terry.
There's the quote that I found when I was looking up, like, because I was so taken by her performance on this time that I was like, I'm gonna go, let me look at Wikipedia. I want to see what has she been doing recently, because like I don't remember hearing about her, and not much. And I did find that that after she changed her name to Ray Hance, stated that she was paid a sum of money for the use of her likeness in the sequel, but that it followed 8 years of quote unquote constant failure in her life. And so she took that money, and this is a quote, took that money and just drove around North America getting shit faced for about 2 years and hoping I would die. Like I did not want to be alive anymore. Like that is so fucking depressing because her performance in this is so good. And I don't think I ever really truly appreciated it.
Well, and there was a really interesting quote that she said at Comic-Con, I believe, that year, where she was like, this was so exciting because as actors, you never get to be just like told, okay, go in the woods and just act. Like they didn't have a script and they had so much freedom. So all 3 of them are really excited because it was like an actor's dream to get this chance. And it's such a fucking bummer that they all kind of got pushed to the side in this whole thing when we wouldn't have it without their performances. And, she got ridiculed for this moment where there's snot going down her face. And what is probably one of the most upsetting scenes in cinema, it's her fucking like goodbye note to her family and like apology for killing her friends. Like it's so sad and so authentic. But of course, to me, it's misogyny, and also like we're 100%. So uncomfortable with the genuine experience and expression of fear on our screens like that all people want to do is laugh and not understand. Like that is probably one of the most genuine depictions of fear we've seen in cinema. And she got a Razzie. I was like,
that's fucked.
And like we all know the Razzies are fucking stupid. Like I'm sure we all feel similarly about the existence of the Razzies as an institution, but like she getting a Razzie for that performance is like perhaps one of the most insulting things. And again, like, it's very misogynistic because in the movie, the men are mean to her. So I think sometimes, especially with this format, people saw that as like perhaps permission to also be assholes to her. And like,
well, and I don't think it helped that just a year later, Scary Movie comes out and has the parody scene where it's just
that's right. I forgot about that
and
too.
it's like a year later. And so that, unfortunately, as much as I do enjoy the Scary Movie, the first two, the way in which it has like influenced the way that we interact with the movies that it is parodying. I cannot look at the Blair Witch Project anymore without thinking of the Gale character just pouring out snot in Scary Movie. And so I think it's funny, but at the same time, it's like when you start to like realize that this is sort of what people now think back on the Blair Witch for. It's not as I don't know, it's not as over the top as people seem to make it out to be. And of course, I think it's because of the parody.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. I think also, like, 1999, the women we're used to seeing in horror movies on that screen around that time they look very different. They sound very different.
Yep.
And like, I think of Jennifer Love Hewitt screaming, "What are you waiting for?" And I Know What You Did Last Summer. People say they didn't like Heather Donahue because of her screams. And it's like, well, for one thing, she's screaming right near the camera. So it's going to be directly in your ear, which is just realistic. But for another thing, because she's not, half naked cardigan off her shoulders, spinning and screaming, "What are you waiting for, Jennifer Love Hewitt?" Like, we don't accept that. And I definitely think it's that just a specific flavor of late 90s misogyny that was like, we're cool with women and we're cool with feminism, but only if it looks and sounds a certain way. And if not, we get to be mean to you. And if you can't take a joke, then you can kick rocks. And I really think people took that as permission to hate this actress because, they were like, I don't like what's on my screen. There's a confident woman directing a movie and then she's screaming in fear. I don't like the way this makes me feel, so I hate it. And my read has been that, so there is no Blair Witch Project, or there is no Blair Witch in the movie, right? Like, we don't see a witch. They don't find a witch. Is there a witch? Whatever. I think that Heather is the Blair Witch because the men make her out to be that. They turn her into a scapegoat. The Ellie Kemper was used as a scapegoat for the town as the Blair Witch. When things were going wrong, they blamed a woman and shunned her away. And Mike and Josh do the same thing to Heather, where shit's going wrong. They blame her completely, but they're all involved. They put her in charge so they don't have to take any responsibility. They say, "You're the one with the map. We don't want to be involved." And then when they, later when it's convenient, they blame her for it to the point where she's apologizing and it's not really her fault. It's not her apology to give. But the men have scapegoated her so far, they do send her in the woods to die. I'm like, the Blair Witch the whole time was Heather because these men scapegoated her.
Wow.
Is my take.
I have never thought about that, and that's fucking incredible.
Thanks.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. Wow.
This movie is so fucking cool because you can watch it and have all of these like cool interpretations of it. Like, it leaves it so open-ended that it's like, oh, is the Blair Witch fucking with time? Which obviously we see in the 2016 one, which I kind of like. Sorry, everybody, we're right. But it's not the same movie, but whatever. But then also, like, there's just so many interpretations to what is going on here. And it's like such a simple movie, but so complicated at the same time. And it's just like
beautiful.
It's incredible. And this is what happens when, like, I always think about this. It's like, this is what happens when you let people be artistically creative. And it's really frustrating that, like, it happens and it goes viral after the fact, but then everyone wants to, like, cannibalize that idea instead of realizing, oh, we should just give resources to cool filmmakers and see what they make with the money. Yes, I know financially, like, maybe that is not the smartest decision, but so often these movies come out of nowhere. They're made for like $5 and a stick of bubblegum in like the woods of any, and like, they're the ones that end up being the hits. It's still happening with like Skinamarink and all that stuff, like that. So we still haven't learned
Blair
about
Witch
the importance.
Project, it inspired James Wan and Lee Whannell when they made Saw. because they were student
Yes!
filmmakers and they said, we want to make a low budget, high impact horror movie.
Yep.
And I just love that those two films that are so special to me are connected in reality and not
So
just a
cool.
way I made up, which I would do if I had to.
The other thing that like I appreciated more on this rewatch is the way in which it lays out the mythology, but it gives you just enough to start wondering what's going on. And like
Yes.
I think it's one of those things that allows you to rewatch the film and sort of come up with different ideas, because like this watch I was very clued in with the fact that we have Mary Brown, who is another woman that everyone in the town calls crazy, but
Mhm.
her fence is made of branches tied together. And so like
Yes.
right then and there's like this little hint that is she, because she comes across as really creepy. She's holding, is it a Bible? She's holding that book or whatever, and
Mhm.
like she's just very off about it, and she's
She's
telling the
one of my
story.
favorite parts of the whole
I
movie.
love
She's
Mary
great.
Brown.
She's
Like, she
great.
is so obviously like the crazy crone character,
Yes.
but then like I just love like the reaction of like when they leave after talking to her, they're like, "Did you fucking hear what she was saying to us, dude? Like, she is not well." But then you're like,
Well,
"Oh."
later, Heather goes, damn, I wish I would have listened to her, but I didn't because I thought she was crazy. I'm like,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck did she say? I should have been listening to her, but I thought she was insane. And it's like
it's a fur, like a horse fur.
like a horse
the
fur
thing-
all over her
So
body.
the thing about that is and watching it now, what I really like as well is the fact that it is again pulling from real life things, because werewolf and witches
Mhm.
were a big thing. Like where
Oh,
people
yeah,
don't realize
exactly.
that like werewolves were part of the witch trials. Like it was werewolves
what?
and witches. Yeah.
I didn't know
So like
this.
the original in Europe, the original European witches in the they were being hunted as being they were, what is it? During the early period, accusations of lycanthropy were mixed with accusations of wolf riding or wolf charming. In the 1598 case of Peter Stump led to a significant peak in both interest in and persecution of supposed werewolves, primarily in French-speaking and German-speaking Europe. So like there's a long history of correlating the idea of werewolves and witches together. So the fact that
Okay.
here we are in this movie bringing out like she was covered in fur, like the idea of transformation, the idea of werewolves, even though it's like a kind of horse fur, but it's that idea that we are establishing something that is connected to history and
Yeah.
kind of bringing it to North America is I find it so fascinating now looking back on the film. I didn't even
Yes.
realize at the time.
Well, and you might already know this. When they're interviewing the townies in the beginning, some of those are scripted and some of those are real interviews with townies. And it's just another way the movie makes you blur the line between
Yeah.
what's real and what's not. And I just think that is so creative.
Well, and like it just, and even like the fact that they never knew at night what the fuck was going to happen. The filmmakers
Yeah.
would just like run into the woods and fuck with them, and they were just like reacting to what was going on, but had no idea. Like
Mhm.
there's so much of this that is so authentic when it is a fiction film, but like there is a lot of authenticity, like you said, that really blurs that line
Mhm.
between like reality and fiction.
Yeah.
Ugh, what a good fucking movie. This movie absolutely rules.
It
It's
is my
25
favorite
years
movie of
later.
all time.
Is there anything we want to talk about before we wrap up, Terry? You look like you
Well,
have a thought.
so one of the things that jumped out at me, and I'm trying to find my note where this was, but there's the moment where, okay, I think I found it, where Josh, I think, no, is it Mike? Yeah, it's Mike talking. He's like, I can't remember which one it is now, but one of them has her camera and he's talking about how like he understands why she
That's
likes
Josh.
it because it's Josh. Okay. It's not
Yeah,
quite
like-
reality. Where he says it's not quite reality, it's like filtered
Yeah.
reality, man. Like you can pretend
Mm.
everything's not quite the way it is. And that line right there, I think ties into the way in which the film itself blends
Yes.
fact and fiction, which is one of the reasons why I think I am a Blair Witch 2 defender. I really like Blair Witch
I think
2.
it's fun. It's fun. It doesn't
Yeah.
have anything to do with my love of the original, but the second one is fun.
But it takes that line of like
It does.
the reality and filteredness of the camera and uses it in a different way. So it's not like, retelling the same story, but in Blair Witch 2, it's all about like they're seeing stuff on camera and it has to be real, but the reality is something completely different. And so
Mhm.
there's that aspect. And on this watch, I was like, oh yeah, that's where Blair Witch 2 kind of got its little seed of idea in my opinion. But at that time, I was so obsessed with Blair Witch that do you guys remember the video games?
I never played them, but I learned about them later as an adult.
I was obsessed with the computer games.
Were you really?
Yeah, I was. The first one was what was it called? It was something to do with Rustin Parr, like the Legend of Rustin Power or something like that.
Isn't it supposed to be like telling his like who played back then, and like you're trying to like the legend of him, like for real?
One of them was, but there was
okay.
So volume, because it was a 3 volume game, and so the first one was Blair Witch Volume 1 Rustin Parr, and it took place in the year 1941. And it was connected to, there's another, so it was made by Terminal Reality, and they made this other game called Nocturne that like posited this sort of secret society that hunts down supernatural type things. And so the idea of the Blair Witch was that the people from Nocturne were coming across Burkittsville and were trying to investigate what was happening with Rustin Parr time in the 1941s and 1941. And I was obsessed with this. Like, I wanted to know. That's what I think I really like about this now is looking back at how much mythology there is there, and how, because it doesn't give you all the answers, you just like, I gotta find everything I can about it. And so I love the games. I played all 3 of them as a 20-year-old. 20-something-year-old.
I wish I could be good at any video game. Like, I'm very bad at video games. I did play Until Dawn and The Quarry and had a fun time with those, but I'm pretty bad at video games for the most part. That's okay. I'm good at watching movies.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. Do we want to wrap up and give this our rating out of 5?
That sounds good.
All right, Terry, you are up first. How many bundles of human teeth do you give the Blair Witch Project?
You know, here's the thing. This is not a movie. This is not a movie that I gravitate to very often. I think the most I've seen it is because of the podcast. I appreciate its influence on cinema, but this is not one that I continually go back to. However, what I do appreciate about it is all the stuff that we've kind of talked about today. And every single time there is a discussion about the movie, I am very energized about it because there's a lot going on here. So for me, this is a 4 bundles of human teeth. I also really like the sequels. I will be a defender of the sequels. Yeah, it's 4 for me. What about you, Mary Beth? I'm pretty sure I know where you're going to go.
Yeah, we're going to have to give this just 5 bundles of teeth and other human body parts. This movie
Delicious.
Is so influential for me. I will watch this whenever. I memorize it. I would watch it to fall asleep sometimes. Like, this is like a comfort watch for me. I love it so dearly, and yeah, I could go on, but I think we all know how I feel about the Blair Witch Project. I mean, I even have my Blair Witch Project tattoo, so like, obviously. But then Ariel, you have the final word. How many bundles of human teeth do you give the Blair Witch Project?
I'm going to give it 5 bundles of human teeth, and I'm going to tie them together like a little stick person, and I'm going to hang it in my yard.
Oh, so cute.
Yeah.
You're going to have a lot of animals coming to check it out.
Well, then maybe they can like dress me like I'm Cinderella or something.
Hell yeah.
I love that. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us to talk about the Blair Witch Project and your book. Where you're online? Where can our listeners find you? And the floor is yours to plug away with whatever you can share.
Okay. Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It was an absolute blast. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Ari_Hellraiser. And you can find me at Blue Sky at Ari Hellraiser with no underscore. And on all my socials, there's a pinned post where you can pre-order my book from Encyclopocalypse. It's out September 17th, but you can pre-order it now. Hardcover, paperback, ebook, audiobook, whatever you want. And yes, you can get physical copies internationally. You just have to scroll down a little bit on the page to see the other retailers link. So hard copies for everybody who wants them.
Yay.
So please pre-order my book. And yeah, that's what I have going on right now, pretty much, is promoting my book. So if you follow me on socials, that's what you'll see.
And listeners, we will include a link in the show notes to the place where you can pre-order it to go out there.
Yeah. All right,
So go
listeners,
check
you've
that
heard
out.
from us. Yeah, listeners, you've heard from
Sorry.
us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with the Blair Witch Project? You can let us know by sending us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on social media. I am at MB McAndrews on Twitter and at mb.mcandrews on Instagram.
And I'm Gaily Dreadful everywhere.
And of course, follow the podcast on social media. We are at Scarred Podcast on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Scarred for Life Podcast on Instagram.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we do have a Patreon.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.